I was 3 corridors away when the news broke, and I still felt it like a pressure change in my chest. The Unity Summit failed in less than 4 seconds. One flash, one scream cut short, then silence. Thick, expensive silence, the kind only palaces can afford. By the time the alarms reached the service wing, everyone already knew the Empress was dead, assassinated in full ceremonial view. And just like that, Lyran Vale was no longer an heir. She was a crown placed on fresh blood. From my assigned post near the logistics hub, I watched the court reorganize itself with terrifying speed. Advisors whispered about continuity. Houses counted votes before the body cooled. Succession protocols activated automatically, like machines that didn't care who they crushed as long as they kept moving. No one talked about Lyran. Not really. I saw her once, days later, through a translucent partition as she crossed the upper gallery alone. She looked taller than the holos, rigid, hollow, like someone holding themselves together through force of habit. Her face was untouched by tears. Her hands were empty. The palace kitchens prepared feasts anyway. Ritual demanded it. Thousands of dishes flowed toward the imperial halls and came back untouched. I signed inventory reports that made no sense. Consumption at 0, waste at maximum. 11 days passed. The courtiers argued over trade routes and military postures. The noble houses maneuvered like predators circling a weakened giant. And the Empress, newly crowned, newly orphaned, did not eat. No one noticed. No one except a human logistics aide with no rank, no authority, and nothing to lose, who realized that if an Empress stopped needing food, an empire would soon stop needing her. I didn't plan to break into the palace. That's the part people never believe later. They imagine some grand decision, some heroic moment where I stood up straight and chose defiance. The truth is messier. Smaller. It started with a spreadsheet and a smell. I was officially listed as a logistics aide, Class C, Earth delegation, which meant I counted crates, signed receipts, and fixed problems no one important wanted to admit existed. Food shortages in the lower kitchens, temperature mismatches in storage vaults, missing utensils that somehow triggered diplomatic incidents. I had no clearance beyond service corridors and no reason to be noticed by anyone whose name mattered, which was exactly why I saw what others didn't. Every night, the same thing happened. The imperial kitchens prepared the morning feasts, perfect, alien-perfect dishes designed to honor tradition and power. And every night, they came back untouched. Entire carts of food rolled past me, still warm, still fragrant in ways I couldn't name, only to be dumped, cataloged, and destroyed. 11 days of waste. 11 days of untouched meals meant one thing to someone like me. Someone wasn't eating. And in a palace that size, that someone could only be one person. I thought about my dad. Back in Indiana, after my mom died, he stopped cooking, said it didn't matter. Ate protein bars and drank coffee until his hands shook. Lost weight fast. Lost color. Lost himself. I was 19 then, home from community college, angry at the world and useless with words. So I cooked. Chicken and rice. Broth from scratch, even when it took hours. Stuff that didn't try to impress anyone. Stuff that said, you're allowed to still be here. That memory followed me through the service corridors as I stared at the access map on my tablet. 7 security layers between the logistics wing and the private imperial chambers. 8 if you counted biometric confirmation. I didn't have rank. I didn't have authority. What I did have was familiarity. I knew which scanners glitched during thermal cycling, which guards trusted routines more than alerts, which steward signed authorizations without reading the fine print because he was too tired to care. It took me 6 hours to assemble a tray without triggering inventory flags. A simple bowl, heat-retentive ceramic. Broth I'd improvised from approved proteins and vegetables scavenged from diplomatic stores. Nothing flashy. Nothing ceremonial. Just food. My hands shook when I stepped into the service lift. Not fear exactly. More like the awareness that once the doors opened, there would be no pretending this was still just my job. I bypassed the first lock with a maintenance override. The second with a borrowed clearance tag that would get me fired if anyone checked the logs. By the fourth, my heart was hammering so hard I was sure it would set off motion sensors. At the 7th checkpoint, I stopped. I could still turn back. Dump the food. Tell myself I tried. Instead, I thought of the untouched feasts. The empty consumption reports. The way no one said her name unless they were attaching it to a policy. I pushed through. The final door opened quietly, like it was embarrassed to interrupt. She was sitting on the throne when I entered. Not the public one, the massive construct of crystal and light used for broadcasts, but a smaller seat, set near a wide viewport that looked out over the capital. The city glowed below her like a living thing. Ships moved in disciplined arcs. Life continued. Lyran Vale did not move. Up close, she looked younger. Not fragile, never that, but stretched thin, like something pulled too tight for too long. Her posture was perfect, drilled into her bones, but her eyes were unfocused, fixed on nothing. I bowed. Too deeply. Too fast. Your radiance, I said, in accented Valdorian I'd practiced exactly twice in my life. I apologize for the intrusion. Her gaze shifted to me slowly, as if gravity itself resisted the motion. You are not scheduled, she said. Her voice was steady, but there was something hollow beneath it, like sound in an empty room. No, ma'am. I swallowed. I know. Silence stretched. I waited for alarms. Guards. Pain. Instead, she said, speak. I lifted the tray with both hands. My name is Evan Brooks. Earth Delegation. Logistics support. I cook sometimes. For people who forget to eat. That got her attention. Not anger. Confusion. You bypassed imperial security, she said. Yes. For food. Yes. For me. Yes. She studied me then. Not like a ruler assessing a threat. Like a person trying to remember what threats even were. And what do you expect in return, human? She asked. The question landed hard. Because it was the question everyone else asked, whether they admitted it or not. I shook my head. Nothing. I don't have power. I don't have rank. I don't even have a good reason for being here. I stepped forward and set the bowl on the low table beside her throne. Steam curled upward, soft and real. I just know what it looks like when someone stops eating because they think it doesn't matter anymore. For a long moment, she didn't respond. Then she reached for the bowl. If you've watched this far, then this story is really interesting to you. Please confirm it by clicking like under this video. It doesn't cost you anything, but it will help me understand what story to publish for you next. Write in the comments who the alien woman in this story looks like, and who you would like to see in the next one. Let's move on. I expected guards. I expected pain, at the very least, restraints, interrogation, some official voice listing the reasons my life had just become very short and very inconvenient. My body was already preparing for it, muscles tight, breath shallow, the instinctive math of survival running in the background. What I did not expect was for the Empress to lift the bowl with both hands, as if it were fragile. She didn't drink immediately. She looked at it first. Not with suspicion, not with royal disdain, but with something closer to confusion, as if the object itself violated some fundamental law of her world. This is not ceremonial, she said. No, I replied quietly. It's just food. Her fingers were long, elegant, faintly luminous along the joints. They trembled, just a little, so little that no courtier would ever have noticed it from a distance. But I did. She brought the bowl to her lips and took a sip. It was a small thing, barely a mouthful, but the effect was immediate and devastating. Her breath caught, not dramatically, not loudly, just a sharp, involuntary hitch, like someone stepping where they didn't know the ground would give way. Her eyes widened a fraction, then unfocused again, not with emptiness this time, but with sudden, overwhelming presence. She swallowed. Another sip followed, then another, faster this time, as if her body had decided something before her mind could argue. I stood there, frozen, suddenly terrified in a way I hadn't been before. Because this wasn't punishment. This was something worse. This was real. What is this? She asked, her voice lower now. Chicken soup, I said. Earth recipe. My dad used to call it the thing that keeps you from falling apart all the way. She laughed. Not the elegant, controlled sound I'd heard in recordings. This was raw and brief and immediately strangled off, like it had escaped without permission. The sound startled her as much as it startled me. I have consumed nutrient matrices designed by the finest biochemists in the sovereignty, she said. I have eaten meals that required a year of preparation and an army of artisans. She looked down at the bowl again. This tastes like someone stayed. I didn't respond. I didn't know how. Her grip tightened. The bowl rattled faintly against the table as her hands shook harder now, no longer something she could hide. Her shoulders rose, then fell, as if a weight she'd been holding for days had finally slipped. "I did not authorize this," she said suddenly, sharply. I flinched. "Your radiance, if you wish me removed." "I did not authorize myself to need this," she interrupted. The words hit harder than any threat. She took another drink, slower this time, eyes closing. And then, without warning, her composure shattered. It wasn't a quiet tear. It wasn't graceful. It was violent. A sob tore out of her chest like it had been waiting for the smallest crack to escape through. The bowl tilted, soup sloshing dangerously close to the rim as she clutched it to herself, her head bowing forward as if the weight of the crown had finally become unbearable. I took a step forward, then stopped. Every instinct told me to do something. Say something. Fix it. But I remembered my dad at the kitchen table, shoulders shaking, spoon suspended uselessly in midair while the grief burned itself out. I remembered how wrong words felt then. So I stayed where I was. She cried openly, uncontrollably, the sound echoing softly off the polished walls of the chamber. Tears traced bright, silvery paths down her face and dripped into the bowl she refused to let go of, as if it were the only solid thing left in the universe. "I buried her," she said between breaths. I stood before the galaxy and spoke the words I was trained to speak. I accepted the crown. I accepted the responsibility. Her voice cracked completely. No one asked if I could breathe. The sentence broke whatever restraint she had left. She folded inward, the empress of a star-spanning civilization reduced to someone holding a warm bowl and crying because it was warm. I felt something inside me split open too. A realization so sharp it almost hurt. She wasn't crying because of the soup. She was crying because for the first time since her mother died, someone had offered her something without asking what it would cost them in return. "I had no power," I said softly, not even realizing I was speaking. "No rank. I couldn't fix anything else." Her eyes lifted to mine, red and luminous and unbearably alive. "That," she said hoarsely, "is why this matters." She finished the bowl. Every drop. When she set it down, her hands were still shaking, but her breathing had slowed. The storm had passed, leaving behind something fragile and dangerous in its wake. Hunger. Not just for food. For the idea that she might still be allowed to be human in the middle of being an empress. "What is your name again?" she asked. "Evan Brooks." She nodded, committing it to memory with the same gravity she might have used for a treaty. "Tomorrow," Lyrenvale said, straightening slightly, the crown settling back into place. Not heavier, but somehow more balanced. "You will bring another meal." I opened my mouth to protest, to explain how impossible that was. She raised a hand. "You will expect nothing," she continued. "You will demand nothing. You will bring it because you can." Her gaze hardened, not cruelly, but with resolve. "And I will eat." For the first time since I entered the palace, I believed I might actually survive this. For the first time since she took the throne, I believed she might too. The second night was harder than the first. Not because of security, though that was still a nightmare of half-broken scanners and borrowed credentials, but because now I knew what was at stake. The first time, I'd acted on instinct and memory. The second time, I was acting on responsibility. And responsibility is heavier than fear. I cooked in a borrowed corner of the delegation kitchen long after everyone else had gone to sleep. Something simple again. Rice, slowly simmered until it gave up its structure and became comfort instead of food. Salt. A little oil. Nothing that would offend alien biochemistry. Nothing that would draw attention on an inventory report. When I carried it through the service corridors, the palace felt different. Not quieter, if anything, louder. I heard arguments bleeding through walls not meant to carry sound. Advisors speaking too quickly. Noble aides moving in groups instead of alone. The machinery of power grinding harder now that the Empress had finally shown signs of life. I slipped into her private chamber just before the artificial dawn cycle began. She was standing when I arrived. That alone told me everything. The first night, she'd sat like a statue, unmoving, as if motion itself cost too much. Now she stood by the viewport, hands clasped behind her back, watching the city far below. She looked thinner than the holos, still, but there was tension in her posture now. Energy, coiled and uncertain. "You came," she said without turning. "You told me to." "I did." She paused. "I was not certain you would survive the attempt." I set the bowl down carefully. "I wasn't either." That earned a small sound from her. Not a laugh. More like an acknowledgement that humor still existed somewhere in the universe. She ate slowly this time, thoughtfully, as if she were trying to understand not just the taste, but what it was doing to her. When she finished, she didn't cry. Instead, she spoke. They were small things at first. Memories, but not the public ones. Not the stories recorded in imperial archives. She told me about the first time she'd been left alone in a ceremonial hall as a child, expected to wait for hours without complaint. About learning to smile without showing teeth. About how her mother's shadow had always been both shelter and prison. I listened. That became our pattern. I cooked. She ate. The palace outside her chambers burned. On the third night, orbital traffic spiked so hard it caused a visible shimmer across the city's defensive grid. Riots, I learned later. Labor guilds protesting ration reallocations. Noble security forces clashing with planetary authorities. Everyone trying to grab something before the balance shifted again. I brought her flatbread that night, warm and plain, and she tore it apart with her hands like she needed to feel resistance. "They think I am weak," she said, her voice calm but brittle. Because I did not respond with force. "Are you?" I asked before I could stop myself. She looked at me for a long time. "No," she said finally. "But they are not entirely wrong to hope." The fourth night, I almost didn't make it. Someone had started logging corridor traffic more carefully. 2 checkpoints that had been unguarded suddenly weren't. I hid in a maintenance alcove for nearly an hour, heart pounding, holding a pot of food like it was contraband. When I finally reached her, she noticed immediately. "You are late." Security's tightening. Her jaw set. "Because of me. Because of power," I corrected. "You just happened to be standing in the way." That night, she finished the meal and then surprised me by asking about Earth. Not the sanitized briefing version. Not the statistics. She asked about winters. About empty highways at night. About what it felt like to cook for someone who wasn't required to eat with you. So I told her about my dad. About silence at the table. About learning to measure time by how long soup simmered. Because it was easier than counting days without my mom. She didn't interrupt. She didn't judge. She listened like someone starving for something that wasn't food. By the 6th night, rumors had started. I could feel it in the way staff looked at me. Too curious. Too careful. A human logistics aide didn't just disappear every evening without someone noticing. And an Empress didn't suddenly start attending briefings again without explanation. She was eating more now. Standing straighter. Asking sharper questions in council sessions. The nobles noticed. They always do. On the 7th night, she said, "They are circling." "I figured," I replied. "They tend to do that." She looked at me, really looked at me, as if weighing something invisible. "You have changed nothing," she said. Then, more quietly, "And yet, everything." Outside her chamber, the empire shook. Inside, she ate and remembered how to want things again. That was when I understood the danger. Not to me, to them. Because an empress who had remembered hunger and survived it was far more dangerous than one who had never known it at all. They didn't come for me quietly. I suppose part of me expected they would. Some discreet order, a reassignment notice, a polite escort back to the delegation quarters with firm smiles and hands too close to weapons. That was how power usually handled inconveniences. Neat. Bloodless. Forgettable. Instead, they made it loud. It started with the alarms. Not the palace-wide emergency sirens, but the sharper, more localized tones reserved for internal breaches. I was in the lower kitchens, stirring a pot I'd been watching like a hawk for the last hour, when the sound cut through the room and every head turned toward me at once. That's the thing about being invisible for too long. When you finally become visible, it's always for the wrong reason. Security officers entered in a formation that was far too deliberate for coincidence. Their armor bore the sigils of multiple noble houses, ostensibly a joint task force, which in practice meant shared blame and diffused responsibility. The man in front read my name from a slate he didn't need. "Evan Brooks," he said. "You are under arrest for sabotage, unauthorized access to restricted imperial zones, and attempted biochemical manipulation of the Empress." The room went silent. I laughed. I didn't mean to. It just escaped. The accusation was so wildly removed from reality that my body reacted before my brain could stop it. "Biochemical manipulation," I repeated. "You mean soup?" The officer's expression didn't change. "You will come with us." They didn't let me wash my hands. They didn't let me speak to anyone from the delegation. They didn't even let me grab my jacket. I was marched through corridors I'd learned to navigate in silence, now flanked by armed escorts whose boots echoed like accusations. Word spread fast. By the time we reached the upper levels, staff were watching openly. Some with curiosity, some with fear, a few with something like guilt. They all knew what this was. A message. The holding chamber they threw me into was small, sterile, and deliberately uncomfortable. No restraints. Yet, but enough security fields humming in the walls to make escape a theoretical concept rather than a plan. An hour passed. Then two. I sat on the bench and tried not to think about what they might do to me if she didn't intervene. If she could intervene. Because for the first time since I'd stepped into the palace, I wasn't afraid for myself. I was afraid they'd reached her first. The door opened without warning. I expected another officer. Instead, the room seemed to tilt. Not physically, politically. The air changed. The security fields dimmed. And Lyran Vale walked in. Not alone. Behind her came representatives of 3 ruling houses, faces carefully composed, and High Chancellor Varos, whose loyalty had always been to the system rather than the person sitting on the throne. They expected a performance. They did not get one. Explain, the Empress said. The word wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried the weight of command without effort, and every person in the room straightened reflexively. Varos gestured toward me. Your Radiance, this human has been conducting unsanctioned access to your private chambers. Our investigation suggests. Stop, she said. He stopped. She looked at me then. Really looked. Took in the stained sleeves of my shirt, the way my hands were still faintly red from heat and spices. Her gaze softened for half a second. Then she turned back to them, and whatever they had hoped to manipulate was gone. You claim sabotage, she said. Produce evidence. Varos hesitated. That alone told me everything. The food he provided was not approved by imperial nutritionists, one of the nobles said quickly. It could have contained. It contained broth, Lyran cut in. Salt. Protein. Vegetation approved for diplomatic consumption. I ate it. I am alive. Silence. Another noble tried a different angle. Your Radiance, this human exploited your grief. He inserted himself during a moment of weakness. That was when she snapped. Not outwardly. Not with rage. With precision. My mother was assassinated, Lyran said. In this palace. During a summit you assured her was secure. Every head dipped slightly. Even Varos. For 11 days after her death, I did not eat. That got their attention. For 11 days, she continued, voice steady and merciless. My advisors attended feasts in my honor. My nobles debated succession advantages. My stewards filed reports. She stepped closer to them. Did any of you notice? No one spoke. I was dying, she said simply. Not of poison. Of grief. Of isolation. Of being treated as a symbol instead of a person. She turned and pointed at me. This human noticed. I felt my throat tighten. He has no house. No army. No political leverage. He had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Her eyes burned. And yet he acted. Varos tried one last time. Your Radiance, appearances matter. If word spreads that a human servant, a human saved me, Lyran corrected. Let it spread. The chamber was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. You will release him, she said. Immediately. No one argued. And you will open a full investigation, she continued, into who authorized this accusation, who fabricated these charges, and who thought it acceptable to use my grief as a tool. She looked at the nobles with something like cold satisfaction. Because if you are willing to kill a powerless human to make a point, I am very interested in what else you have been willing to hide. The security fields dropped completely. I stood, legs unsteady. Lyran faced me once more. You are not to be touched, she said. Not by them. Not by anyone. Her voice softened, just enough for me to hear it. I am still here because you fed me when no one else would. That was when I understood. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was the moment the balance shifted. And every person in that room knew it. They tried to kill us 3 days later. Not me personally, not at first. That would have been too obvious, too crude. The houses that had survived Lyran's purge were smarter than that. They understood symbols. Messages. They understood that if you couldn't strike the Empress directly, you struck what she had chosen to protect. The human delegation. I was in the secondary kitchen when the palace shuddered. Not an explosion. Not yet. but the kind of deep structural vibration that rattles dishes and makes your bones hum. Emergency lights flared along the ceiling, bathing everything in harsh amber. Someone shouted in Valdorian. Someone else ran. My first thought wasn't fear. It was her. I dropped what I was holding and ran. The corridors were chaos. Security units moving against the flow. Courtiers shouting orders that contradicted each other. I caught fragments as I pushed through. Breach, diplomatic wing, casualties unconfirmed. By the time I reached the inner junction, I knew. This was a message. The attackers had hit the human delegation's residential sector. Precision charges, timed to avoid total destruction, but violent enough to leave no doubt about intent. They wanted bodies. They wanted fear. They wanted Lyran to understand that protecting humans had a cost. I found her already there. She stood in the ruined corridor like the eye of a storm, her guards spread in a tight perimeter around her. Smoke curled along the ceiling. Medics worked frantically over injured diplomats. I saw blood, human blood, on white Valdorian stone, and something inside me went cold and sharp. She saw me. For half a second, the Empress vanished, and there was only Lyran, raw fear in her eyes, searching my face as if counting limbs. "You're alive," she said. "So are you," I replied, breathless. Her jaw tightened. Not all of them. The report came fast after that. A staged attack, designed to look like an internal dispute between human factions, but sloppy in the way arrogance always is. The weapon signatures traced back to subcontractors tied to the same houses that had pushed for my execution. They wanted her to choose tradition or survival, because tradition said humans were guests, temporary, expendable. Tradition said no alien empress tied herself to a species with no power base in the sovereignty. Tradition said she should issue condolences, evacuate the delegation, and quietly let the message stand. I watched her listen to her advisors. I watched them argue that escalating would destabilize the empire, that confronting the houses openly could fracture the council, that she was still too new, too vulnerable, too alone. They were wrong about one thing. She was no longer alone. Lyran dismissed them all. Every last one. The chamber emptied until it was just us, guards at a distance, pretending not to listen. She stood with her back to the viewport, city lights burning behind her like a second constellation. "This ends tonight," she said. "What are you going to do?" I asked. She turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw no hesitation in her at all. "I am going to break precedent," she said, "and they will never forgive me for it." I swallowed. "They already won't." "That," she said softly, "is freeing." She stepped closer. "Evan Brooks," Lyran Vale said, formally now. "You entered my palace without authority. You fed me without permission. You stood in the path of houses that would have killed you to protect their pride." She held my gaze. "You have already crossed every line that mattered." I didn't like where this was going. "Lyran, I am appointing you cultural liaison to the throne," she said. "Effective immediately." The words hit like a physical blow. That's not possible. I don't have the credentials. I don't have. You have my trust," she said. "And you have something this empire desperately lacks." "What?" She gestured to the wounded, the frightened, the humans being treated as people and not bargaining chips. "You see individuals," she said, "not categories." I shook my head. "They'll say you're compromised." "They already are," she replied calmly. "And you'll be protected," she continued. "Diplomatic status. Imperial authority. Any attempt on your life will be considered an act of war against the throne." I felt dizzy. "You're doing this because of me?" "No," she said. "I'm doing this because of them." She turned back to the viewport. "For generations, the sovereignty has measured worth in fleets and bloodlines. Tonight, they tried to teach me that compassion is weakness." Her voice hardened. "I will teach them how wrong they are." The announcement went out within the hour. Every channel, every sector, unavoidable. The human delegation would remain under direct imperial protection. The attack would be investigated as an internal act of treason. And Evan Brooks, human, civilian, former logistics aide, was elevated to full diplomatic standing as cultural liaison to the Empress. The reaction was immediate. Shock, outrage, panic. The council fractured in real time. 3 houses walked out. 2 issued public condemnations. 1 quietly sealed its borders. And across the lower levels of the city, something else happened. People talked. Not about fleets. Not about policy. About the Empress who had starved and lived. About the human who had fed her. By morning, the hierarchy of the sovereignty had not collapsed, but it had cracked. And for the first time since I'd arrived in this palace with nothing but a job title no one respected, I realized something terrifying and extraordinary. I had power now, not because I wanted it, but because she had chosen to survive. And in doing so, she had chosen me. History didn't record it as a revolution. No fleets burned. No capitals fell. No enemies knelt in chains. That disappointed a lot of people who had been waiting their entire lives for a clean, violent turning point they could point to and say there. That's when everything changed. They were wrong. Change came quietly. It came in revised trade charters that no longer classified humanity as auxiliary labor. It came in council chambers where nobles lowered their voices when Lyran Vale entered, not out of fear, but uncertainty. It came in the way other species began requesting me in negotiations, not because I carried authority, but because I carried perspective. And it came, most of all, in the way the Empress ate. We didn't hide our meals anymore. Not entirely. She still had ceremonial feasts, still played the role the galaxy expected, but between those performances, there were moments that belonged only to us. Shared breakfasts before council sessions. Late meals after long days of dismantling old alliances and building new ones. Simple food. Real food. The kind that didn't pretend to be more than it was. I watched Lyran change, not into someone else, but into herself. Her rules sharpened. Her patience shortened. She stopped tolerating cruelty disguised as tradition. When houses resisted, she didn't threaten them with force. She let them starve politically. Resources redirected. Access delayed. Influence ignored. It turned out hunger worked on more than just the body. Humanity's status shifted with her. Slowly, then all at once. We gained respect not because we demanded it, and not because we proved we could destroy anyone who denied it, but because we proved we could care without permission. Because one powerless human had acted when power looked the other way. People asked me how it felt, being the man who changed an empire. I always told them the truth. I didn't change anything, I said. I just cooked. Lyran liked that answer. One night, long after the worst of the political fires had burned out, we stood together by the viewport where I'd first seen her alone. The city glowed below us, calmer now. Healthier. You know, she said, there are still those who believe you manipulated me. I smiled faintly. There always will be. She turned to face me, her expression soft but certain. They cannot accept that the most dangerous thing in the galaxy was not a weapon or an army. Her hand brushed mine. It was a meal given without price. I thought about my dad, about kitchens on Earth, about grief passed down and survived one bowl at a time. I had no power, I said quietly. No rank. Lyran nodded. That is why it worked. Across the galaxy, the story spread, not as myth, not as propaganda, but as something harder to dismiss. That an empress had been saved, not by soldiers, not by titles, not by fear, but by one simple meal. And the moment she wept, the universe learned something it had forgotten, that humanity didn't need permission to matter. Thank you for listening to this story to the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Write in the comments what moment in this story impressed you the most. And also check out the other videos that just appeared on your screen. See you in the next video.